Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to present Sarah Mitchell, head of our documentation department, as well as Scott Allen, who is our lead designer here at Alpha Software. Today, Sarah is going to be continuing her discussion of new features in the latest release of Alpha Anywhere. And I can already see her screen up there. So Sarah, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I am, so take it away. Just also a quick reminder to the audience that you can ask questions, and you can type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. All right, take it away, Sarah. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Dave. So yes, we're continuing with our Alpha Anywhere 4.6.3 presentation from last week. We did have a little micro release since that presentation. It's now called 4.6.3.1. So I wanted to throw that out there for you folks. And then I also wanted to address a question that was asked last week in our webinar, and I said we would address it at the end of the webinar, and then the webinar ended and I did not address it, but it's the offline installer. With the Alpha Anywhere installer, you can make an offline installer, which is a version of the universal installer that only contains the version of Alpha Anywhere you want to install. So I just wanted to share this documentation with you folks who might be in a situation where you need to provide a very specific version for installation either on the server or with desktop deployment, and you don't want people to be confused and have a dozen different options. So this article explains how to do that. And then also another thing I wanted to point out, and this is a rare case, it's not going to apply to a lot of people, but it applied pretty heavily internally while we were testing Alpha Anywhere Community Edition, and some users may run into this. But Alpha Anywhere Community Edition and the Alpha Anywhere Developer IDE full version are the same product. And so when you install Community Edition and give it that license, it's going to use that license for your Alpha Anywhere Developer Edition if you have an older version of Alpha Anywhere installed. So this article explains how you can install them side by side. And it's pretty simple. You just need to put your Community Edition license in a file and then save it as license.key in the installation folder. And if you don't know where the Community Edition has been installed in your system, you can find it in the Alpha Anywhere installer. And I'll show you here. I'll launch that real quick. On the products or on the installed tab, this lists all the things you've installed. And right here, it shows you where on your file system it's been installed. So that's where you need to add that file, that license file. So there are two things I wanted to cover real quickly. And before I continue into the rest of our release, were there any questions about offline installer or side-by-side installation of two versions of the IDE?
Nope, no questions on those right now. Thanks.
Great. All right. So I wanted to highlight this again. If I forgot to highlight it this last week, I apologize, but we do have some deprecated functionality with this new release in 4.6.3. First, you cannot set argument values in components using the SetArgument JavaScript function anymore. That was removed. If you want to set the argument value, you're going to have to do so using an AJAX callback. And then another change that was made, and this only applies to desktop users. Community Edition people will not run into this at all. But there's two functions, form save as and browse save as, which would let you save a form or a browse to a PDF or other file format. That can't be used anymore. What you're going to have to do is create a report or something, a report, a letter, or a layout. I'm not sure why those other two might apply, but you'll have to create a report for them and then print those instead in this new release. And I suspect that probably has something to do with how we've migrated away from AmiUni to our new PDF print system, which is better for a lot of reasons. So mention that real quick, and then we'll get into the new features.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes.
We had a little question about, was the set argument removed or simply deprecated and scheduled for future removal?
So they're deprecated, but you can't set the argument anymore.
Okay.
Just if you have any functionality that relies on this, it's just not going to work moving forward. So look into it, test it before you deploy.
Okay.
Right. So new features. First one we're going to talk about list control actions. There's this new option to filter and check rows. I don't think I mentioned this last week, but I wanted to show you how it works. And I'm going to launch Alpha Anywhere again. I had it open. Here we go, current release. I had it open and then I did something. So let's open up. I think it's in this. There we go. Almost. I almost made it. There we go. Okay. So let's make a new UX component. I'm going to maximize this so the PowerPoint isn't distracting in the background. And I'm going to add a list. And then we'll create this list based on a SQL data source. Filtering a list on checked rows only works if you're using a SQL data source. So I'm going to use the Northwind sample database. And we'll just pull the customers table in here. And we'll just grab those first few. Okay. Go over to layout real quick, add these in here. So the new action lets you reduce or filter the list based on rows that have been selected using a checkbox selector. And that's this property here. This has checkbox select control in the list properties. And when you turn that on, it adds a checkbox column, basically. And in here, you can configure some additional settings, like what the icon is used to indicate that it's checked or unchecked selected row. We'll turn that on for fun. And then this is the control itself. You have to add it into your list layout. It's not inserted automatically. But what that does is it just adds a checkbox column. It doesn't inherently do anything once you've added it. You have to then add your own logic to decide what happens. Maybe you're checking rows that you want to export to Excel, or in this case, we want to filter. So, you come in here, you would check these, and then once you've done that, some action happens, and it can happen on the server or the client. Well, the new action that we've added to the list actions for action JavaScript let's look it up. List control actions, multiple actions. This one right here, this will automatically filter, do a search, and only show you those checked rows in your list. So we'll set this up real quick and I'll show you how that works. So all you have to do is set it up. In past versions, you actually had to do this manually. So now that's set up, full preview. And we'll scroll down the list of ways here and pick some down on the bottom. And I click that. It's only going to show me those selected rows. Now this is only going to work on a list that's based on a SQL data source. If you've got static data, it's not going to work. It doesn't apply because it makes a callback to the server to fetch the new data to display in the list. And because it makes a callback, it probably won't work in an offline environment. So that's filtering your selected check rows with Action JavaScript. And I think we looked at that last week. There's a bunch of other ones in there that we haven't even shown before from previous releases that are pretty cool as well. So we're going to switch gears now over to storage connections, and hopefully everyone here on the call is heard about these before, but if you haven't, a storage connection is like a connection string to a database, but it connects to a file storage system. And this can be Amazon S3, it can be Azure, it can be the server where the application server is running if you are running your own version of the application server. If you're running the IIS version or the classic server, you can't use disk storage on cloud. Cloud is, because of how it's been implemented with multiple servers serving your app, you can't really rely on saving a file on a server and having it available to all the servers. So you can't use disk storage. But you can use S3, which is what we recommend for a lot of reasons. Anyway, a new one we've added. If we go over here to Web Projects Control Panel, we'll just go into Tools and Storage Connection Strings, and we'll make a new one. There's a new option in here called Wasabi Storage. And Wasabi is just Amazon S3, but they've done it a little differently to reduce the costs. So if you are interested in file storage on the server, on server-side scripting, Wasabi is now available to you. In terms of storage connections and how they interact with applications, Amazon S3 is predominantly the only one we support on Action JavaScript. So if you don't have a storage provider, but you're looking to get one, we recommend using Amazon S3 for sure. But we have added Wasabi. And in here, you'll also see we have Sharepoint as another option, which is the other one that was added more recently than the first three that we started with. And this presentation is going to be all over the place because we have lots of improvements all over the place. So I wanted to touch again on momentum scrolling. I felt like I did a poor job explaining it last week. Basically, what it is how much effort the user needs to put into dragging their finger up and down the screen to initiate a scroll. And then the companion piece with that friction setting basically is the duration. How long does it scroll before it stops? So we've added settings for setting both the friction and the duration of the scroll for the list and the view box. The lower the value of friction, the easier it is to scroll the whole world. The higher the value of duration, the longer the scroll will take. So I'm going to touch on that briefly. We also did a little bit of work to improve panel scrolling. The specific use case is that if your panel can scroll up and down, but you've got something like a list that scrolls left and right, trying to like scroll through that list with the vertical aspect of the panel is a little bit and not great. So we made some changes, so that's a lot smoother now. So you can pan through your list scrolling left and right and up and down as well without the panel interfering. Oops. And then finally, we added a new option to all of the pull past in and pull to refresh settings, and that's just the ability to specify how long the animation for that is. And I can show that on a list here. Let's see here. So if we go in the list properties, there's a pull to refresh behavior option. And what this lets you do is simply drag the list down from the top of the screen to trigger a refresh, a callback to the server to go fetch the records and reload them. And the new setting here is duration. How long should that animation be shown? You can set it to 0 if you don't want to show any animation, and you can set it to a very, very large number if you want people to wait a while. So we'll take a look at those two here. Oh, hold on. I might need to have this in the mobile simulator. Okay, yeah, I have to have this in the mobile simulator. And I'm gonna remove that button for now so that we can add a panel card around this, and then tell the list to fill the whole panel card. So it takes up the whole screen, and then I'll turn on the mobile emulator. Go back into live preview. And here we go. So when you pull down, see that little icon there? Looks like a recycle icon. See how it goes away immediately? That's because I've set the duration for the animation of my pull to refresh to 0. If we go back in here and we change it to a larger value, that animation will actually hang around on the screen for a bit. So let's make it something ridiculous, like 3 seconds. This is in milliseconds. It says down here in the help here. So now when I pull down, it's going to take 3 seconds for that to go back up after I've released my finger, in this case, the mouse in the example. And so that's for the list. Panels and containers have a similar one where if you pull past end, which is if you've scrolled past the end, the bottom or the top, that a similar animation can be shown. So switching gears, this is now we're starting to mix a little bit of 4. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the version numbers. 4.6.3 and 4.6.3.1 improvements. So this first one, default date and date time formats. These are new settings that are available in the project properties. And what they allow you to do is set the date format that is used throughout your application. If you have access to the server running the application server, so if you're running the classic server or application server for IIS, the server will actually read the regional settings of the server to determine what the date and date time format should be. In the case of Alpha Cloud, you do not have access to that. So these default date time formats were added for that case. And it also applies in a situation where maybe you don't have easy access to the server. Maybe in your company, you have to go through someone to make any actual changes on that server. So you might have the classic server, but you don't have access to change that. So you can use these settings here to set those time formats without having to worry about what the server's regional settings are set to. And then another option that's been added, and this is in 4.6.3.1, is the ability to import settings from another workspace project. This is for those of you who might have set up configurations like date and date time formats and other things that are important for any project you deploy to your server. You can now import those. And all of these settings are found on the Web Projects Control panel in the Project Properties dialog. So if we scroll down here very carefully, over here in dates, here's those date time formats for grid and UX components. And then down here is that new link, import from another project. And this is just going to list all the projects in your workspace. If you want to, I think if you want to import settings from a project that exists in another workspace, you're going to have to merge them together somehow. But here's where you can pick things. And then what that will do is just read those settings out of that workspace and update these ones here. We've added a new feature that should make setting up security maybe a little bit easier for some folks. You can now import users from an Excel file. And what that lets you do is quickly add a bunch of users with their password and the groups that they're assigned to using Excel. There was an option in here to import expert users from a DBF table. However, because Community Edition doesn't allow users to use DBFs, we don't support DBFs in Community Edition, and we went through a lot of effort to make sure they weren't there. You can't really use this option. So this Excel file to import is the way to do that for importing if you want to use Excel. Also note that there is an option to use just JSON to import and export user information here. And this is in the workspace. This is not up on Alpha Cloud. This is not on your deployed server. It's just the web security settings here when you're setting up security for a new project. And then here's that file format for the Excel file. When you click on that link, there's an option to generate this, but basically what you need is 3 columns: user ID, password, and groups. And that's the user ID that they use to log in, the password to assign them, and then a comma delimited list of groups to assign them. Now these groups need to exist in your security framework to use them. So we're now gonna start sort of looking at some more advanced technical code heavy features, and these are just new and modified Xbasic functions. We've got 4 new ones that were added that will let you do everything from query what kind of drivers you've got on your server to searching a string for characters. So this first one I feel is pretty self-explanatory. Does the string contain any of the characters in this character list? It just searches a string. Maybe you've got some text you just want to see if it contains an ampersand or an angle bracket or a slash. The ampersand, angle bracket, slash would be the string you pass in for this characters argument. And then the string that you're searching is the first one. And that's going to return a true or false value if it finds it. This next one is a little more involved. And so I'm going to pull up in the documentation for that one to explain it. There are cases, so back up a little bit. When you make a callback to the server to fetch a resource, get a picture, download a JavaScript file, or run a server-side script, that's all done using AJAX callbacks. And in the case of server-side scripts, there are occasions when you might want to do something that takes a rather long time, maybe 5 minutes or up to 15 minutes, which is what this function supports. To execute something, it's just going to take a really long time. Well, when the app calls the server for those resources, it's going to sit there and wait for a bit to get them back. And if it doesn't get it back within a reasonable amount of time, which is definitely less than 15 minutes, it decides that the callback has failed and it doesn't wait for the resources anymore. So we added this A5 run async Xbasic function that would let you call that long 15-minute script and let it just run off on the side somewhere and let your app continue going about its day and just not wait for it, because we already know it's going to take longer than the timeout. So your app's going to decide it failed anyway. So this lets your app continue. It doesn't induce a failure state. And there are ways to make a callback later to test to check to see if your job is finished. So I'm going to paste this into the, I'm going to use this one here. Paste this into the chat here for you guys to check out. So what this function takes is the actual script you want to run. So it does need to be passed in as a, let's see here, as a string. So this whole thing here, if this is the thing I need to run, this is what gets passed in to this parameter up here, this Xbasic to run, the script to run. And what it's going to give back eventually is the GUID. Well, it gives back the GUID, and then eventually it's going to tell you whether or not it succeeded. So there are ways to look that up and figure out if your job is done. There's a video down here that helps explain it. Check it out. We could have an entire webinar on this subject, so that's why I'm not getting into too much details about what this does. And it might be something that we should cover in the future. Another function which is really cool, this one, this A5 create SQL tables from Excel file. It lets you export data from Excel and import it into a SQL database. And a use case for this actually came up for DevCon last year. And I don't remember how we got our Farmington database out of Excel into a SQL database, but we did. But now we have a function that would make it a lot easier in some contexts. And this just reads a sheet and it creates all the tables and imports the data into your target database. This last one, this SQL connection list drivers. was added to get a list of installed ODBC drivers on a server. It only lists ODCB drivers. It won't list your other drivers out there. I think like maybe SQL Server, or not SQL Server. Microsoft SQL Server is ODBC. If you've got like MySQL or MariaDB, I don't think that's included in that list. It's just strictly ODBC. And the reason that we added that was because the A5W info will now list all the ODBC drivers that you have installed on your server. And it also lists your system's locale information. And those of you unfamiliar with this, A5W info is a function you can run to get a status page of information about what like service status, sessions, and stuff like that you've got running. We also made some changes to FTP upload curl and curl file get. FTP upload curl can now be used in your web applications. Previously, it could only be used in desktop application because it opened a user interface. It opened a dialog when it ran to alert you if it succeeded or failed. So we removed that. And so now you can run it in your web applications. And some of you may find this easier to use than some of the other functions we've got for uploading to FTP. And then curl file get added support to download files from a remote location. So not just a local place. And then a few other improvements I wanted to highlight. Again, we've improved list performance you'll definitely notice this if you've got an app that's full of panels and you've got a list on every panel, and then you do something that causes the page, the panel to refresh. Previously, we might have rendered every single list on every panel, even though you could only see one, and now it just renders what you see. So that should have a major positive impact for some of you that have large apps. We also made a change to how incremental refresh works. Incremental refresh is a function in the list. It downloads updates for the list and updates those rows that don't have any edits in them. And the change that was made was that it doesn't update a row that also has unsaved edits in the detail view. So if you've been working on a row of data, editing a record in detail view, and you haven't saved it back yet, it's treated as if it had been saved, so it doesn't get updated. The list delay populate action, which is what you can do to prevent your list from downloading a ton of data from your server until the user's performed a search. It no longer downloads records if your filter is blank. There were situations in the past where if you cleared the filter or submitted a search that was empty, it would go and fetch all the data anyway, and that wasn't what the intent was, and it's not the behavior you want, especially if you have a lot of data in your list that could be downloaded and populated into it. And then we also added a couple warnings that you may run into. If you use a security system and you're publishing a new application, but you don't have any users, we're going to warn you about that because you're not going to be able to log in after you've published. And then alpha launch, we added a warning that if the main UX component that you've registered for the app contains none of the exit code to exit the app to go back to the main alpha launch page, you're going to get a warning. Now, if you've got an embedded component in that main component that does contain it, you may see this warning anyway. That's a false positive or false negative. You can ignore it safely in that situation. If you're like, wait, no, I have it, you can go ahead and ignore it. Now, that warning isn't going to completely prevent you from publishing an app that you can't exit, because you still need to be able to click that button to exit the app or link or however you've implemented it. But we definitely warn you if you've forgotten it outright in that main component. So that's what I've got on left here on the updates that we were not able to get to last week. So it's a little bit shorter. See, we have like about half an hour of time left here. So I wanted to open it up to some questions if anybody had any. And everything's on the table, everything we've covered, and just other questions you might have about Alpha Anywhere.
Well, hi, Sarah. Thank you so much. This is going great, but we have a number of questions from lots of different folk in the panel. So we have, we'll just start from and work down my list here. Regarding deprecation and removal, there were a couple of questions that kind of came in early on. One of those was, does the UX give you a warning when opening it stating that you are using something deprecated.
No,
So, okay,
nope.
there you go. That answer.
Just like
Nope.
we don't warn you if you're using something that doesn't exist in your JavaScript. You're only gonna run into that when you run it.
Okay. All right. And then kind of continuing the earlier question that there was based on a set argument, that this person had been using it and the set argument process still seemed to work with the current additions that he was working with. I think he was saying that he did not want to update his server if in fact it's going to be removed, not just deprecated. Do you foresee that happening with set argument, that it will just stop working?
Well, it can't be used to change an argument value anymore. You have to set that argument in the server-side code, and the reason it was made for some security reasons. And I think it is a good change, especially if you've used arguments to do something like filter your UX on user data. So what you're going to want to do is you're gonna have to update it. You can still read some argument values out of the state info object, which I've pulled up the release notes here. This is the note we've got on the changes here, but I don't think the function has been deleted. I think your code will still run. It's just not going to behave the same way. So you're definitely going to need to update it.
Okay. All right. Here's another one that's sort of regarding appending a date to a file name. Do you know if it is possible to automatically append the current date to a file name when uploading a file with the file upload action JavaScript on a UX?
Upload action JavaScript on a UX. Let's go look at it. I'm gonna make a new UX. File upload action. So I suspect I'm going to need a file upload download control to take a look at the action. So they're using a file upload action?
Mm-hmm. Apparently so.
Okay. We have 4 to choose from, so I'm going to take a look at the first one. And let's look at what options we have in here. So probably want that guy to be selected to see what we get here.
So store file.
So there is an option to stored file name transformation expression. And this can be used to do things like specify a short file name or file name in code. I think you could do it with the transformation expression, but I would need to investigate this further to find out what functionality you have available to you. It looks like it's written with I don't want to say Xbasic, but we have a markup. So like, here we go. 92, I think, is the slash. So here's our transformation down here. It's a bit of a cross between SQL and Xbasic here. Well, there's your date. So you could put your date in there. I mean, you could do story tran. Let's see if that exists.
Not valid so far there.
Not valid. D to C. So yeah, we'd have to look into see what functions are available to you. Oh, that works. Date to character. So I suspect you can do it. It's just working out what this expression is. We'd have to research that more.
All right, thank you. Okay, and then this is going back to storage when you're talking about S3 and these other storage options. Could they use OneDrive or DropBox as a storage option?
Currently, Those aren't listed options in here. So if you wanted to upload to OneDrive or Dropbox, you would need to handle that on your own. Now we do have if they have an API, you could certainly create a web service to do that, to consume if they have like a REST service available for working with. If they have like a Swagger definition, you could import that into here and then use Xbasic to upload and download your files.
Okay. Thank you. And regarding a filter action, will new filter action work when pagination is on?
Let's find out. Oh, I deleted my button already. Turn off the mobile and add that button back. A list action. And it was the server side check selected rows there. Okay. And list one. And the question was whether or not it worked with pagination turned on.
Correct.
So let's paginate our data.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, let's make them small, 5, and we'll use the navigation buttons, and it has a navigation bar, and let's check our settings here real quick, and it's going to be placed below user content in the list footer. Okay, that sounds good. And we'll go over here and we'll check let's go look at the checkbox settings. I'm going to turn off pull to refresh. See if they have anything in here specifically for pagination. No, okay. Alrighty. So if we go and preview this, it should only fetch the first 5 records and display that. And we should see a little like toolbar on the bottom to navigate to different pages. Or not. Why did that not save? It didn't save my pagination settings. Oh, that's not preview. There we go. Oh, it's getting hot in my office. I had to close the door. The door is blocking the air conditioner.
There we go.
There it is. All right. So little buttons to navigate to different pages. And then our list is showing 20 because I didn't change it back to 5 when I had to go set it up again. So the question was whether or not this works with pagination. And I think the bigger question is if you go to 2 and then go back to 1, does it remember what you selected? And it does not. So it's going to work with pagination, but it's only going to work with the things you select on that first or on that current page. So, and then it's going to do this crazy thing where it shows you that you have 5 results when you don't. So no, it doesn't really work that well with pagination. If I'm looking at it here.
All right.
So we should probably add a feature request for that.
That sounds like a good idea.
And if that person who asked the question could send us an email to guides@alphasoftware.com and just describe their use case, that would be great.
That sounds like a good suggestion too. Okay, so moving on, we have a question regarding user ID. To allow a logged in user to change their user ID, should I use the A5WS save web user values function? They haven't found a UX template that covers changing the user ID. Is this possible? They weren't sure. How do we do it?
So yes, you can. Oops, I'm in the wrong thing. You can use their. Let's go take a look at what that function that they just described was. Her A5WS
save web user values. Mm-hmm.
Save web user values.
I think it's save _ web user _ values.
There it is. Thanks. All right. Well, it's not that one. It's this one.
Yep.
Oh, I see. Okay. So this uses a dialog component. And this was used with there was older versions of Alpha Anywhere before the UX came along. We had this thing called dialog. And we also have the logging. I think the logging component is another one that does that. But that's what that function is used with. I don't believe this is going to work with the UX component, but that doesn't mean you can't set users save their password. So the new way to do it would be to have a UX that showed had an option for them to enter their current password and then verify what their new password is. So you would add 3, let's just build it real quick.
But this is to change username. The
Oh,
user
to change
ID,
username.
yeah, a user ID, not a password. Like.
Oh, they just want to change their user ID.
Yes, correct.
Oh. I'm not 100% sure that I actually know how you would go about doing that. So we have change password for the current user, which is a template you can add, which will let you change the password for the current user. We have an edit account for existing user. And I should probably put this on a component project that has security turned on. I'm wondering if this one would just work if you just took this username option. Yeah, I'm gonna have to play around with that. Yeah, I don't have the security framework enabled. So I assume in theory you could use this template to change it and it should work.
Should we have this person send an email to us?
You can send an email. Yeah, I can make a note to. This might actually be a really good thing to add a documentation article for.
All right. Excellent. All right, moving on then. Regarding SQL table from Excel, is there a version requirement of that Excel file or anything like that for? Well, it says rev requirement, but maybe they meant version requirement.
Rev requirement.
Yeah, maybe they meant ver, like as in version requirement for Excel.
So that Excel file that it generates, it's generated as an XLSX file, which I believe is like Office 2007 or something. I think that's the file extension you have to use. So if you can, open and edit XLSX files, which there are, I believe, OpenOffice or LibreOffice and Google Docs might even be able to handle it. Other tools can save them.
Okay. All right. How about regarding curl? Can curl upload and download work with Amazon S3?
Yes, but I'm wondering why they're asking that question.
Because
if you're uploading and downloading files to Amazon S3, then you probably should look at using storage connections and set up a storage connection string so you can just use the A5 storage functions to handle it for you.
Well, if this person wanted to reach out to us, if they had a specific reason why they were doing it that way, then they can talk to us about that there. Otherwise, how about updates from a stored procedure? Assuming I want to call a stored procedure to perform some updates by passing the returned value from a list checked rows, how do I do this?
This is beyond what I'm able to answer in a webinar now. I know enough about stored procedures to point you to the documentation. Let me stored procedures. So I suspect what you would need to do is get your data back from the list, send it an AJAX callback, and then do all your stored procedure calling using Xbasic.
Is there documentation that we can refer the person specifically, the person who was asking about the curl question? I think that their issue is that they're having a hard time uploading work to S3. And is there documentation that we would want to refer them to for more information about uploading work to
So
S3?
I did test, I posted the link to this storage connections in the chat window.
Okay.
We do have the file upload Amazon S3 action JavaScript that you can use. In terms of actual functions, I can't think of anything that's specifically for S3. So because that's why we built these A5 storage. So you don't, this storage connection, you don't have to make a named one. You could specify it verbatim in here, I believe.
Okay.
But these would handle that upload for you. Yeah, copy folder just works on the file system. So that's not going to work for you.
Okay. We also had somebody asking, they feel like they remember seeing a video of ours where there was some discussion about security settings for entries in a tabbed UI. And they were wondering if there's a link to documentation or videos specifically about that, about user set security settings for tabbed UI or in a tabbed UI.
I know exactly what they're talking about. I think the video you saw recently, because this is the only one I could think of, was the storing security groups in a database, which would allow you to change the security group access for one of the tabbed UI options using this security stuff. So I've sent that link in the chat. There's a not Xbasic JavaScript function that's linked in there at the bottom that lets you do that programmatically, toggle that. But I assume that's what they were thinking of, because that's the only thing I could think of that would be related to tabbed UI with security settings that we did recently. And I think we did this well over a year ago.
All right. Well, I think that is getting us to the end of our questions. Unless there's one that I crept in here that I didn't see. Is there a method for displaying all logged in users of a web application in a control?
There's not, and there's a very good reason for that, and I do not remember what the explanation is. But it basically comes down to we don't know. We don't know because of how they get stored. There's just no, at least I don't think there is.
Okay. I do see another one in here. Where do I find examples of how to connect to SharePoint storage? For example, put a document to a doc library and add update the list record associated with that doc.
Good question. So SharePoint is a storage connection, and I suspect the way you would do all those operations is with these A5 storage functions. We don't have any specific examples for that, but I can certainly reach out to the dev team to see if they can get some.
Okay. I think that's about it at this point with our questions. There are a lot of great questions this week. So thank you for all of your questions that you provided. I think we've caught it. Is there more about the return value and loop through the result? Oh no, sorry, this was somebody's follow-up question. My apologies.
We'll follow up for what though? Now I'm curious.
Yeah, so let's see here. I gotta find this person's, sort by the asker here. Okay. This was about displaying the values of a list checked rows individually. So the one that was about passing the return values from a list checked row, because they wanted to call the stored procedures.
Oh, right.
That question, and then they followed it up with a couple of things with like, can I display the values from a list checked rows individually while looping through as against all checked rows together? And then they followed up by saying it's more about the return value and a loop through the result.
Okay, so an important thing to know about this checked rows setting and getting the return value is that the value that's going to be associated with the checked row is whatever you're returning for the selected value. So a list is a data control object. It can have a value, so you can call get value and set value, and those two functions, like what they return, is set up here on the data source tab in this return value setting. So whatever you have configured here is what it's going to return back to you. If you want the primary key back, this needs to be set to primary key. If you want all of the list data back, you could set it up to return all of the list data, but that's what you're going to get back. Like, this is what controls what you're getting out of the list. In terms of getting those values, I believe, let's go look in here. I believe we have a way to get the checked values back. And if anybody sees it, let me know. Maybe we don't have one in this action. Not seeing an action for it, but I do know. No, don't save this. Let's go over here for now. It's not the button I wanted to click. So if we go to insert method, the list object has some operations you can call on it. It has get checked rows, set checked rows, filter on checked rows, which would be that new functionality that we just saw. So you could call get checked rows to get those values back. So let's go ahead and insert this here. And I'll show you how to get the list object too. So go var lobj object get control list one. So get control, contrast with get pointer. Get control gets the object, the JavaScript object that has methods on it, like get checked rows. There's another function called get pointer that just returns your HTML DOM object, the div or text box controller, whatever it is that's been rendered on the page. But for lists, you can call this to get a pointer to a list object, and then if it exists, which you should always check for. Then you can call a method on it, like get checked rows, and then do something with that data. Let's actually put the data into a variable. So if we go back real quick into the insert dialog and go look at that method. It says here that I get an array back. So this alert's just going to tell me it's an array. But I believe you can do like a JSON stringify on these to get it turned into a text value. And so let's wrap this in a function. Call it alert checked rows. Function. I'm going with that, and then I'm just gonna copy this guy and go over to controls and add another button. Okay. Go to text mode. I'll just call that function. Save it, run it. So if you wanted to display this on the client, you could use that function to basically tell you like which rows are checked. Well, run 1, 2, 5, and 6 are checked. Which is not the primary key, so that's interesting. If you wanted to get the checked rows in a callback, there's actually, you don't need to do that much in terms of getting them. Button, callback, add an Ajax callback. We'll just call it do callback. And I'll create a function prototype for it and copy the whole thing to a clipboard and then open the Xbasic Functions section and paste it. And scroll up here in the comments section. There should be a comment telling you how to access those checked rows. I'm not seeing it. Set element, returning JavaScript. Well, submit data from list control. We'll just see what we get there. Click OK. And then I'm going to go to my Xbasic Functions section and put a debug 1 in here. And then live preview. Debug 1 is going to open the Xbasic debugger for us so we can take a look at what's getting submitted there. Click my, let's actually check a row or two. Callback, there we go. Make that big. And we'll take a look at E. I'll move this up here. And I believe in here somewhere there is some information about the checked rows for the list. Is not list data. I know there's a way to get it. I will have to look it up real quick. But I also noticed that we're running out of time. So you may want to email us so that we can send you an email response. But you can definitely send those checked rows back to the server in a callback. And they are available.
Excellent. Well, I think that's it then at this point. Our time is up and we've answered a lot of questions. But as always, if people have questions, please email them back to us, guides@alphasoftware.com. Sarah, would you like any closing words?
No, I mean, new release, lots of stuff in there. Please test in a an environment, testing environment before you deploy, and make sure that you know, if you're using any of those deprecated functions, that you handle it, and also test your reports, because we don't support AmiUni anymore. That's gone. It was removed permanently in this release. So check your reports to make sure that they're rendering as expected, and definitely tell us if something seems amiss.
Indeed. All right. Well, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah. And thanks to everybody for coming. And we'll see you all next week.